Welcome to the Blueprint Breakers podcast. What is a blueprint breaker? If you live your life outside the typical traditional lifestyle blueprint, you are a blueprint breaker. We are here to start a conversation, to assemble resources, and to build a community. This podcast is for empowered women in midlife and beyond who are preparing for a powerful next era of life. My name is Amy A. Palmer. I am your host and facilitator for our conversations. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. To stay connected, up to date, and to receive all of our free resources and gifts along the way, join us at community.blueprintbreakers.com. What inspired me to record this episode, well, there's lots of things. It's been bubbling up for a while. I've been wanting to do it for quite some time, and I've been hesitant. I've been nervous. I've been scared to do it. I knew that I wouldn't be able to fully appropriately articulate my thoughts and my points, and I'm afraid that I might offend somebody or hurt somebody or just say the wrong thing. But I've decided that it's time. It's been on my heart for a long time, and it's time to speak out. And particularly with lately, the way the word woke has been weaponized, that it went from being a word used by the Black community, and then it was adopted by white people who were being supportive of the Black community, and now it's been sort of weaponized into being a bad thing and being an insult. We even have the president of our country speaking against it, like very anti-woke, as if that's a good thing. So all of that stuff has prompted me to once and for all speak on this topic of racism and racial injustice, inequality, inequity, all of the things. There's no way I'm going to do this perfectly. There's no way this is going to fully articulate my thoughts and experiences, but it's my first imperfect attempt. So what I'm going to do is I want to share a little bit of the timeline of what my experience has been like as a white woman, how I have viewed racism, how I have viewed people of color, women of color, how I've thought about them, what my perspectives have been. So I want to just share a little bit about my foundation and then where it came from, just with the hope that other white women may relate. Ultimately, I think we have a lot of work to do, and it's just the very, very, very first step is awareness and understanding and beginning to think about what actions need to happen and how far we need to go to bring us together and to unite us. And obviously, I would love to eliminate all racism. And I think what's closest to my heart is to heal the divide between white women and Black women, and to really unite and empower us together, because I strongly believe we are better together. And so part of what I'm going to share today is with that end goal in mind. So let me start with how I was raised and my beginnings. I was born and raised in upstate New York, central New York, in a very small town right on the edge of Syracuse, New York. And in my immediate community, there were very few Black families. In my entire school, which was K through 8, there were 2 Black families. So at an early age, I didn't interact with Black people or any people of color much at all, and didn't really talk about it or speak about it. I mean, the history of the town where I was born is very heavily Irish and Italian, first and second generation. When I was young, it was like my friends' parents and grandparents had immigrated in. So it was like early generations of like Irish and Italian. So it was like kind of new in the progression of how those particular immigrants evolved in terms of how they were treated in our country and in our society. But it was very focused on Italian, Irish background, which I didn't have. I came from I had a Irish, English, well, like all kinds of different elements of whiteness in my background. So I didn't like fully identify with either of those cultural groups. So I didn't really know much, if anything, about Black people or Hispanic, Asian, Indian, very little exposure other than what I might have seen on TV, which was probably at that time not very well representative of reality. It was probably very stereotypical in a derogatory manner. But even that doesn't really jump out at me. I think my awareness of other races and other ethnicities as a child, I think I was aware that they were different. They appeared different. And I knew that they were in the minority, which in my mind meant that there just wasn't a lot of them. And especially since I rarely ever saw them. But I didn't have any feeling one way or the other about that, at least like not consciously or overtly. What I did know on some subconscious level is it was sort of understood that people stayed with their own people, like that we had separate neighborhoods and separate ways of living. And, it's all good. You do you over there. We'll do our thing over here. It was very separate. And that, from my perspective, I thought that to be a fact that was understood, that you stay with people who are like you, that look like you, and that, I guess, look at the world like you. The biggest divide that I had in my community was between those of my friends that were Catholic and those of my friends that were Protestant. That was like the big difference. We didn't even have any Jewish families in my immediate town. I also assumed that any non-white race or any other ethnicities, that they also understood that everything's like that they be with people who are like themselves. I felt like this was like an accepted truth among all of us and something that everybody supported. But I want to make a point. It's not like I ever stopped to think about this. This is me looking back, trying to be back into the shoes of, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old Amy, and how I saw the world and what I thought about it, trying to sort of recreate what my experience was, stepping into her shoes and looking at things through her eyes. But at that time, I certainly didn't stop and think about it or have any conversations about it. I was never distinctly told that Black people were on any hierarchy below white people. I was never told to treat them worse than anybody else. I personally never heard racial slurs being used around me amongst family, but I do have memories of other kids using racial slurs. And I don't remember it seeming any different than any other slurs or names. I was called a lot of horrible names growing up as a child. And I think it was just another form of bullying and bad language being used by kids. I do have a memory. I started as a cheerleader for Pop Warner football in, I think, a second grade, 7 years old. And I did that for many, many years, all the way up till high school. And in our Pop Warner League, which was small towns around the whole region and much of the state, there was one particular team that was primarily African American. In fact, I think it might have been 100% African American kids, families, players, cheerleaders, all the things. And I do remember our feelings towards that team. I remember there being I was afraid to go to games that were at their home field. I preferred it to be at our home field. I remember hearing stories, although never witnessed. I heard stories of like fights and violence, and like there was like the thought that there would be a lot of violence and that the players played dirty and the cheerleaders cheered differently than we did. And so there, I definitely remember a lot of that feeling coming from the adults. I remembered being like warned before we would play that team, but I never interacted with that team. I never interacted with the other cheerleaders or anything like that. I just remember that there was there, we would keep a distance. As I moved into high school, I went to actually the Catholic high school, which pulled from all the schools and areas around the area. I didn't go to the public high school. And there was a larger percentage of Black students at my high school. And again, from my perspective, others could have had different experiences, but from what I recall, it was understood that the Black students hung out with the Black students and the white students hung out with the white students. Not that there was like not anything wrong with any of them, any of us, them, us, any groups, any ethnicities. There was nothing like wrong or different or anything like that. It was just understood that we sort of, stayed in groups, separate groups. I don't remember any interracial dating. I feel like there might have been an occasional situation. And if that, like if a white girl was hanging around with a Black boy, I do remember feeling a certain way about that girl. I remember, oh man, I would have, judged her for it in a negative way and sort of imposed sort of a slutty kind of it was not considered a good thing. It was not considered a positive thing to date or, connect with the opposite sex of another race. I have a memory of, God, I think I was in maybe 8th grade. So this is before high school. And I remember that, so the young Black boy, actually it must have been like 7th grade because he was like a year ahead of me. And I remember him flirting with me. And I flirted back. And I didn't have any romantic interest in him. And I don't know if it's because I didn't have any interest or because I had internalized the fact that that's not a good, that you just don't go there, and without thinking about the why behind that. And, but I remember being okay with like openly flirting and having an exchange and hey, having laughs and stuff, believing that that was okay because it's totally understood that this doesn't happen. Like, we don't cross that line. And it never even occurred to me that he might have been interested in me at that time. I mean, looking back on it in hindsight, when I remember our interactions, it was he was interested in me, but it never occurred to me at that time because it was so ingrained in me that that was a rule and that was a line, and he knew that and I knew that, so nothing else would ever be considered. So that was my experience of that at that time. Then in high school, I had my first Black friend, a young girl a year behind me. We became friends because we were both on the speech forensics team. And so we connected over that. And I'm trying to remember how I felt about that friendship. I mean, I remember connecting with her because she was very bright and I looked up to her, but there was definitely like a distance. Now, to her credit, I think what made the friendship possible is she had a lot of white friends, a lot of white girlfriends. And I don't know if that was the difference or not, but we were friends. It was one of those friendships that was just for a short while during that season when we were both doing speech and debate together. But that was my very, very, very first friend who wasn't white. That was in high school. And it never got to a level of super, super closeness. Now, zooming out a little bit and thinking about Black history and what did I know about Black history? I knew what we were basically taught out of textbooks about slavery. And we were just taught the textbook version of it, not the full version. And so my view of that is that there were, way, way back, many long time ago, so far away that those people were so less evolved. Those white people who were slave owners were so evil and misguided and didn't understand that what they were doing was so wrong. There was no way that modern current white people would ever be that evil. So there was a definite distance, and it was like those southern backwards white people that were messed up. So it wasn't my people, it wasn't my ancestors. There was it, so it was so I was able to feel like there was such a distance between that period of our history and my history and my experience. Anything post slavery, now because I went to school in the 70s and the 80s, I was born in the mid 60s. I was in school in the 70s and the 80s. So we didn't learn anything about more recent history, about how things were in the 40s, 50s, 60s, the whole civil rights movement and everything before that, and segregation. And I don't remember really learning about any of that in school. I don't even really remember hearing about that on the news, because remember, our only exposure to the news was maybe an hour of news that might have been on TV at night, and I wasn't usually in the room for that. As a child, I would not watch the news, so completely ignorant of anything that's happened since, right? So on my mind, horrible things happened to Black Americans eons and eons ago, and then it had nothing to, in my mind, had nothing to do with the current state of reality today. That's definitely where my perspective would have been up through high school into college. Now, I do feel like it was considered unacceptable to treat people poorly or to treat them unfairly. I feel like I might have just had sort of this foundational separate but equal mindset, although that verbiage wasn't necessarily used or formed, but I kind of feel like that was the foundation of my perspective, separate but equal. When I went to college in upstate New York also, and it was majority white. I had very little interaction with anyone of other races or ethnicities, even in college. It wasn't until after college. I moved to New York City right after college, and I started to move around to different cities around the country, big cities, medium cities, and I started to travel, but that was later, where I would travel out of the country. But it wasn't until I got out of my little bubble of upstate New York that I started to be exposed to more diversity of people. I slowly, very slowly began to wake up. I knew there was discrimination. I knew that there were people being treated badly, being beaten, being killed. I knew that. I knew that there were Black communities that were struggling. If I heard a story or became aware of situation, I would feel badly about it. It was probably sympathy and not empathy, because I don't know that I fully understood. I know that I've had the thoughts of, I don't understand why they have so much violence against their own people. I don't understand gangs. I don't understand why they don't cooperate with the police when the police tell them to. I know I would think, don't they want to better themselves? Don't they want a better life? Don't they want to try? I know I had those kind of thoughts. I know that I was horrified by police brutality and had little understanding or empathy. I didn't understand why they would just not comply. Just comply. Why don't you just just do what he says? I know that I didn't understand looting and riots and protest, because from the perspective of my reality, I was never in a position where any of those things was necessary, right? Like my reality was so far removed by choice and by circumstance, so far removed from their reality, that there was no way I was going to be able to comprehend what their reality is. Over time, as I entered my adult years, I started to have more and more diverse groups of friends of different races, different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions. And obviously that's the key. That's the key to all of this, first of all, right? Is meeting people as people, connecting with people as people, none of the separate but equal thing. I was never going to be able to connect and understand anybody from a distance. So it was just having more interactions, having more friendships, more ties with all diverse population of peers. Now, I will also, disclaimer on that, it did tend to be those that were in a similar education, professional, economic scope as me. It was from higher education and career ambitions and economic status. It was still within that sphere of society. I wasn't all that diverse in terms of I had little to no connection with the super uber rich and little to no connection with anyone really, really struggling in lower economic brackets. And as I got older, obviously, I saw more and more and more interracial dating and marriages around me. And at that point, as I started to mature, it looked beautiful to me. It looked wonderful. I didn't understand why other people had a problem with it. I didn't understand why people would react to that. It was like, mind your own business. Love is love. I thought as I got older, I thought that as a society, we were evolving, we were integrating together, we were becoming more and more inclusive. I thought the diversities of our population were really, melding together, but I never really stopped to give it much thought. I did not spend intentional time thinking about race. In my 30s, possibly into my 40s, I might have been one of those people. I don't think I ever did say this, but I think I could have said, I don't see color, as if that's a good thing, as if that's a way of showing that, I believe that all races are equal. Like I didn't understand the nuances of what it means to say that I don't see color and how that means that you're not seeing the disparities, you're not seeing the inequities. So I definitely didn't get that. As Obama entered office, I was thrilled. I celebrated. I cried. I was emotional. I thought it was wonderful. And it was a sign that our country was evolving and we were coming together. It was a beautiful thing. And finally, the races would get along. And I thought it was progress, all the things. Even then, among my friends, even among my diverse groups of friends, we didn't discuss race. I saw that there were racial discussions happening online and in the news, but we did not have those conversations on a personal level between individuals. Now, at the same time, professionally, I was building and growing my corporate career. I was climbing the executive ladder. I prided myself on being an empowering leader. I soaked up all the learning I possibly could. I wanted to be the best leader I possibly could be. And I cultivated a very diverse team. I hired and promoted people of all backgrounds. And I was very proud of that fact. Considered myself very inclusive. It was always very important to me to be fair and equitable. And that was definitely part of my identity. That's who I was as a leader. And I think the vast majority of people who have worked under my leadership agree with me. Then, though, a valued employee of mine, someone who was a strong performer, a high achiever, she was a younger Black woman, she filed an official complaint about me. And she alleged that I had treated her very unfairly, created a hostile environment by discriminating against her, treating her differently based on her race. I was floored. This was like 5 tons of bricks falling on me at that time. I was hurt. I was hurt because I thought this employee and I were close. I thought that we were tight. I thought we had a great professional relationship. I viewed her as a shining star that could go very far with her career. And I did expect a lot from her, and I was tough on her. But when this first happened, I was dumbfounded. I had no idea. How this could have been her experience of me. I was convinced she was intentionally and purposefully lying for some reason. I was very, very sure that nothing that I did with her, towards her, no communication, no actions were racially motivated. I was 1000% convinced of that fact and very secure in that fact, because I knew what my intentions were in things that I did and things that I said. And I was sure she was barking up the wrong tree. I was absolutely positive of that. After investigation, it was concluded that there was no evidence of discrimination or hostile work environment. We came to an agreement and she continued with the company. There was one tiny little part in me, because I had cared about her as much as I did, there was this little part of me that said, she must believe this is true. And they're like, what did I do? What could I have done? Like, it really, really, cold water in the face kind of thing made me stop and think about it. But I was so hurt and angry and in denial over the whole experience. I had a hard time reconciling. I didn't understand how my view of my relationship with her and who she is and how we were together, I had a hard time reconciling how that view was so far from her view, because from my view, I went above and beyond for her. I gave her extra incentive, extra time, so I had a lot of hard time trying to figure out how these two perspectives could coexist in the same reality. It took me a very long time to get some answers internally. What I realized is I did care about her and her success. I did see her as a high performer. I did see her as somebody that was going to be able to continue to succeed and continue to grow and get promoted and, advance in her career. I saw all of that. At the same time, I had a vision in my brain, a vision or a mold of what a good, strong, effective leader looks like. And when I say looks like, I don't mean physically, I mean attributes, traits, how they do things, how they communicate, just how they move in the world. I had a very clear vision of what that looked like, because that's who I was trying to be, because that was the vision and mold. That was the mold that was sort of imprinted on me. Talk about blueprint breakers. I was not trying to break these blueprints at all. I was given this mold to fit into, without realizing that mold was actually the white man leader mold, the white male leader blueprint. That never occurred to me. Here I thought I was doing great things by trying to give someone feedback to help them to adjust and adapt and metamorphosize into this other version of a leader. And what I was actually doing was honing in on the parts of her that were what made her a strong Black woman. Let me give you an example. I remember giving her feedback. I gave her feedback. I told her, you have such powerful energy, because she did. She was a presence. I told her, you have such powerful energy. When you walk into a room, you completely take over that room. And so because of the energy that you give off, the charisma that you have, you take over the entire space. Now, if you walk into a room and you have positive, good energy, you bring everybody up there with you. If you walk into a room and you have bad, angry, frustrated energy, you're dragging everybody down with you. And I gave her that feedback. I was trying to articulate to her to manage her energy, and it ended up being feedback about managing her tone, like that I was either directly or indirectly was falling into the trap of calling her aggressive, or falling into the negative stereotype of an angry Black woman, and was trying to erase that from her. If you had pointed that out to me at the time, I would have denied it, because on a conscious level, that was not my intention. I mean, I thought that, there's certain ways to behave that will help you get along and move up, and there's certain ways to behave that won't. So I'm going to call you out on all the ways that you're not behaving, not realizing that it was, microaggression. I don't even know about all that micro. That was the piece that sort of as I just sat and reflected. And it just took a long time because I had to get over my own emotions about all this. I was deep in denial for a really long time because I was supposedly very inclusive, very woke, even at that time. I I thought that was part of my identity of who I am. I'm a liberal, by God. So I was very resistant to taking a look at it to find the truth in what she was saying, But I did start to finally find it. And then we go into 2020. We have Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd murder, when everything got heightened. And for me, it was like a light bulb went on. It literally was like a switch being flipped. All of a sudden, I was able to somewhat see things through other people's eyes, other people of other races and other situations and other circumstances. I felt like I was able to more deeply and fully step into their shoes more than I had ever been able to do at any other time in my life before that. And I know that that's what was happening across the country. A bunch of us white people, especially us white women, were becoming the quote woke. That's when we took over the name woke, because we woke up and we started to see it. And I think it's because we were all like trapped in our homes and we were looking at these things that were happening, and we had to face it and we had to be still with it, and we had to take time to think about it and to experience it. But it just really started to click. I started to study systemic racism and what that meant. I didn't really get it. I always felt like, well, slavery was so long ago. What's that got to do with you struggling now? I don't get it. What do you mean you want reparations? Why would we pay you for something that we didn't do? That would have been my thought prior to this light bulb going on. Now I was like, whoa, that we've put a group of people at such a disadvantage. We have deliberately and intentionally put them at such a disadvantage for so long that in order to have any kind of equity, we have to make adjustments to even attempt to make an even playing field. Also at that time, I remember looking around at all my various groups of friends, and at that point, I wasn't interacting with people in person. We were all still in and out of lockdown for like the better part of a year and a half, right? So I didn't have a lot of in-person time with my friends, but we were doing a lot of Zoom happy hours and Zoom get-togethers and all of that. And it occurred to me that I had never stopped and asked any of my friends, any of the people in my life, what their experience was with race or how they felt about anything. And I felt immense shame and guilt around it, huge, and clumsily tried to make up for that by initiating some conversations on that with different friends of different groups, very clumsily trying to approach the topic, very, very uncomfortable. And I can only imagine on the other side of it for people of color all of a sudden being bombarded with all their white friends asking all these stupid, all of a sudden out of nowhere, their white friends want to have deep, deep conversations about race when it's something they've been dealing with their whole life and nobody has shown interest in it. That had to have been, at the very least annoying. Professionally, my company decided to roll out a huge DEI initiative. And because I was overseeing one element of the business and my team had some of the most diversity of any of the leaders in the company, I was tasked with finding people on my team who wanted to serve as members of the DEI committee. And I remember at the time knowing this was not the right way to go about doing this. I felt it was very knee-jerk, reactive, and very performative, and on some levels sincere and on some levels not sincere in terms of the mission and intention. But I had to approach Black women who worked for me and ask them to serve on this committee. And I still feel horrible about putting them in that position. And I sensed the discomfort from them as well. But being a good corporate leader as I was, right out of the white male leader mold, I followed my orders. I did what I needed to do, even when I had that nagging feeling it was not the right thing to do. Why was it not the right thing to do? Because there was no thought given to what these team members of different races, different backgrounds, what their current experiences were like. Everybody was going through it, but people of color, it was times 100 what they were going through, emotionally, mentally, everything. And so then to ask them to sort of like, oh, I want you to rise up and help us bring everybody together. It was putting too much on them. We were putting the responsibility on them. And then when we would have these DEI committee meetings, we'd be putting out these ideas and we'd be like pushing them to give suggestions. And it just was not, the intentions were probably good. I don't know. I hope that the intentions were good in doing all of that, but it wasn't the right way to go about it. Now let's talk about white women and Black women. When Trump was elected the first time, I remember Black women saying, Black women with platforms that were vocal online, I remember them saying how angry they were at white women for letting them down and just throwing them under the bus, because the majority of white women, vast majority, I think the first time Trump was elected, it might have been like 60%. I don't know. It was pretty high, voted for Trump. And I understood the anger, but not completely. I remember I've heard over time how Black women as a collective have felt sort of not served by the feminist movement, not included. I know there's a lot of historical information around that, which again, I didn't necessarily fully understand. I was confused. In time, I began to understand. We do not, white women, use our white privilege to impact or influence racial equity and to attack racial injustice. We don't use our white privilege to do that. We don't want to sacrifice our security for that. We act like we're together. We act like we're definitely in favor of supporting you. We want everybody included. We want everybody taken care of. We act like that. But when it comes down to it, we will choose our white man over our Black woman all the time. So that means that we end up having to support some of what's things that are happening racially, just being complicit in our silence, or not looking at, when we go to choose a candidate, not even looking at those issues and focusing in on just a select few issues so we can feel better about our decision. So what helped me to understand things a little bit better was when I discovered Jane Elliott, who'd been around for decades and decades, discovered Jane Elliott and her teaching about white privilege. The what is privilege exercise that I found online was very eye-opening. I saw it on YouTube, and it definitely just sort of clarified everything for me. And then searching for things about systemic racism and what it all means really, really helped to clarify situations for me. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here for a second to try to illustrate one of the points about the divide between white women and Black women. I don't know if you remember about a year and a half or more ago, the trend online about women choosing the bear. The question was, if you're alone in the woods, would you rather come across a strange man or a bear? And the women, by vast majority, chose the bear. And if you're a woman and you choose the bear, then you understand the reasons, because you know what to expect from the bear, right? So it's very, very clear. You don't know what to expect from the man. Is he safe? Is he not safe? Is he going to make me think he's safe and he's not safe? We've more likely have had experience with some sort of violent treatment or abuse or sexual assault from a man. We have more chances of that than that we've experienced any kind of violence or anything from a bear. And if we say that we were attacked by a bear, we're more likely to get support. People are going to help us and believe us. If we say we were attacked by a man, people don't believe us. So in a nutshell, those are a lot of the reasons that women chose the bear. Men were enraged. Any women who commented on this online were attacked viciously by men, and the whole thing was, not all men, how dare you, what do you expect, like, about how we were wrong for feeling that way. And they would try to like logic our way out of our thought and our belief. They were viciously reactive to the woman's response of this online, instead of going, oh, whoa, like stopping and thinking and being like, whew, that's something to think about. So very few men became reflective as a result of that online social experiment. Then somebody took that exercise, took that question, and asked Black women. And I've seen the question asked in a couple different ways. I've seen it asked, if you're in the forest and you come across a white woman or a bear, who are you going to choose? Again, they chose the bear. And I also have heard it said, if you are at work in a one-on-one private meeting, would you rather be in that meeting with a white woman or a white man? And the Black woman chose the white man. They would, by far majority. So this was happening online. And then guess how white women responded to that online? The same way the men responded to the bear. Defensive, denial, anger, deflecting, all of the things, instead of stopping and going, wait, what do you mean? Why do you feel unsafe with a white woman over a white man? And if you ask them, they don't trust white women, because the white women will weaponize their tears. They'll weaponize their proximity to white men and use it against Black women. They will seem to be an ally, they will try to manipulate to be trusted, and then not be trustworthy, not be worthy of that trust. So it's very, very similar. I was not, by the time I saw all this play out online, I was not surprised at all, and it made a world of sense to me. Shortly after this all happened, Kamala and her presidential candidacy began, and I was determined to support Kamala 1000%. I was not going to let my sisters, Black women, down, and I was going to support her 1000%, which I did. Some of her stance on some issues I was not on board with. There were some things she wasn't quite progressive enough that I didn't agree with. But overall, I felt that it was important enough to, I felt like I owed it. I did. I felt like I owed it to Black women. Thought that it was important enough for our country to support Kamala. And so that's what I did. And that's what a lot of white women did. We mobilized. We followed the lead of Black women who did an amazing job with fundraising and gathering support with Zoom meetings, and we followed closely behind them and did the same thing. We raised a lot of money. We got a lot of excitement and energy, and it was like all for one and one for all. We got you this time. I even saw Black creators online talking about, hey, I feel differently about how the white women are approaching it this time. I really feel like they've got our backs. They're gonna help us with this. And we fucking didn't. We fucking did it again. We let them down again. The majority of white women voted against Kamala. How did this happen? We were determined to do it right this time. I'll tell you how it happened. On election day, I was traveling internationally to meet up with a very diverse group of friends for a women's gathering, a group of us. I think there was 10, 12, I can't remember how many of us there were. And we arrived together the day after the election. So we had the news of the results. And this group, this diverse group, was almost half and half politically. There were different races, different backgrounds, different religions represented in this group. And so I can only imagine that everyone was going through it emotionally, internally at this time. I know I was. I know my roommate was. I know a few of the people that I was closest with that I knew was sort of on the same side politically. We were upset, angry, depressed, sad, like all the feelings. And I'm sure those that were on the other side politically were, I don't know, happy, elated. I don't know. Why don't I know? Because we didn't talk about it at all. We didn't talk about any element of it on any level. Now, mind you, I know we're supposed to keep like politics out of like fun times, politics out of friendships. But if we can't have these difficult, hard conversations with people that we supposedly care about and love, whether it's family, whether it's close friends, if we can't hear each other, how are we ever going to advance? If we just keep ridiculing and insulting each other behind each other's backs, or online to each other's faces online, and not like really asking questions and really listening to where the other person is coming from, how are we ever going to find where our common ground is, if there is any common ground? How are we ever going to come together to move forward and move onward? So that is what happened on a grander scale as far as white women are concerned. This is why white women let Black women down, because we did not talk to our friends who we knew or suspected were leaning on the other side politically. We did not talk to them in an open, supportive, intelligent way. I'm generalizing here, but from what I could see and what I experienced, we didn't have those conversations. If anybody was having those conversations, it was name calling, it was with emotion and frustration, and it was just pushing each other further and further away from each other. Or we just avoided it because we didn't want, like, I have friends who I respect greatly. I respect very, very much. And I knew what they were going to do on election day. And I never talked to them about it prior to, because I was in fear of ruining or losing the friendship or alienating them in some way. It was easier to avoid the difficult conversation. So I was never really able to ask, like, even if I could have asked what I would have liked to have said, I know you believe in racial equity. I know you believe in inclusion, and yet you don't believe that this administration is dangerous to people of color, to women, to LGBTQ plus. Help me understand that. Why don't you think that they are dangerous? Or why is this not a priority for you? Why do these other things come first for you? I don't understand that. I wish I could have asked my friends those questions. Maybe I would have been able to hear what they had to say. Maybe I would have been able to offer a different perspective, offer a different point to it, something. But there's zero chance of moving things forward if you're just avoiding the topic altogether. So I'm going to wrap up this. So this turned out to be much longer than I had intended for it to be. I'm really, really nervous about putting this out there because I know I'm missing so much. And this is all from my view, one person's perspective. And I know that that's a little bit dangerous to do in these current times. How I want to leave this conversation today is, I think it's time for us to start having those conversations somehow. We need to stop trying to like insult and name call the other side, quote the other side. We need to start having those conversations. We need to take a step back and really think about how can we really be an ally? What does that look like? And we're going to have to start having those tough conversations. So thank you for joining me today for this episode of the Blueprint Breakers podcast. If this has resonated with you, if you have any, I would love to continue this conversation. I ask this of you guys every episode, but I double, triple, quadruple mean it for this one. Send me an email, amy@amyapalmer.com. What are your thoughts? What are your perspectives? What can we do? How do we make this better? How do we come together? Anything that comes to mind for you based on hearing what I'm saying. What did I miss? I want to hear. I really, really want to hear your thoughts. I'm wishing you a peaceful week. Keep on breaking those blueprints and rewriting your own.